2019 is wrapping up, so like always, we're making a bunch of lists rounding up the best and worst in games this year. And today, it's unfortunately the worst games of 2019. The ones we really dislike the most. Now keep in mind, these are our personal choices here at the gameranx offices. If you like one of these games, that's fine. We're not dunking on you. Everyone has different tastes. So we're looking forward to hearing what you guys think in the comments. Either way, however you feel, let's get started off with number 10. Buckle up, let's talk about Contra Rogue Core. Core? I don't know how to read. Either way, fans just really didn't want this. Frustrating stuff like the overheating weapon cooldown system.
6 hours later.
And the camera angle also leading you to getting pelted by off-screen attacks a lot. But those weapons, like they just kind of feel like they go against Contra. The rocket launcher lets you shoot like 2 rockets, then you gotta wait for a brief cooldown. Like, what gives? Contra was all about the chaos, and at a glance, Rogue Core does look like that's still the case, but it just doesn't feel quite right, and that's a massive bummer. Also, the PC version also seems like a hot mess. When it launched, the frame rate was locked at 30 FPS. I've seen, some people will defend this one, but ultimately, it's just a big letdown. And honestly, it's sad. Like, I feel bad for diehard Contra fans that were expecting something more. Again, this is Konami. To expect something from Konami with an original property like that is, kind of naive. It could have been cool, but unfortunately, nope, it ain't. It's like an okay shooter, but not an okay Contra game. You know what I mean?
Hey folks, it's Falcon, and guess what? I'm here for number 9. So anyway, let's talk about Narcos: Rise of the Cartels. An action strategy game based on the hit Netflix TV series. That being said, fans of, the genre don't love it. Is this a game that I would totally savage? Not necessarily. But if you're aware of good entries of this genre, they tend to be a little more advanced than this. The combat is really rudimentary, it's not very engaging. AI is not the worst thing you've ever seen in your life, but it's not good. The way they work out the turns is just excruciating. You only get 1 activation per turn, which is, like I said, if you've ever played a strategy game, probably something that's going to infuriate you. Like, you're like, move this guy. Okay, you get to move a guy. Move this guy. Okay, you get to move. Like, everything you do basically gives the opponent the ability to do a thing.
Now, over at number 8, and talk about Spike Volleyball. Now, forgive us if you've heard this one. We did cover it in our previous video where we looked at the worst games in the first half of the year. But Spike Volleyball is pretty rough. This is one that Falcon talked about, and he really didn't like it. Volleyball games are often pretty awkward, but this one definitely has the worst controls. The highlight of the game is that this stadium looks good. There's that. There's at least a visual engine in place, but the camera is insanely awkward, and it does a really good job of highlighting how cheap and unconvincing the animations look. Look, it's so funny, especially in the instant replay stuff. You really see how freaking rough this game is. Now, I get it, there isn't a massive demand for volleyball games. It's probably a smaller audience than you'd expect, so budgets are limited, but still. You know what, honestly, if you're looking for an unconventional sports game, I know it's not volleyball, but just go play Windjammers instead. Do yourself a favor.
Hey folks, Falcon here again for number 7, which if you've ever wanted to see what it looks like when EA neglects something horrifically, look towards FIFA 20 Legacy Edition on the Nintendo Switch. Go ahead and look at FIFA 20 Legacy Edition on your Nintendo Switch, and then look at FIFA 19 on your Nintendo Switch. Tell me the difference. I'll save you the trouble. It's the roster, that's it. And it's not like FIFA 19 was like the shining version of FIFA 19, it's a neglected version of the game. It's crappier that doesn't keep up with the mainline FIFA games, continuing to have some of the same troubles that were fixed several games ago on other platforms. If you liked FIFA 20 on any other platform, care about some of the features that they've added, don't bother, they're not here.
Now over at number 6, let's get a little divisive here. Let's talk about Ghost Recon Breakpoint. Now, some people are already freaking out about us including this one, but ultimately, for us, we hashed it out, and really, it was a disappointment. This is coming from people that really kind of liked Wildlands, and Wildlands grew to be an even better game over time. Breakpoint might be the same way, but as of now, as of how it launched, it was just dull and uninspiring, and we just didn't really feel like we wanted to stick around with it. Don't get it twisted though, it is by no means the worst game on this list. And again, if you're playing it and if you found a community or if you found a friend or you're just loving it, it's solo, good for you. I'm happy for you. The shooting in this game is very competent, the movement, everything feels there and high quality, but ultimately we just found the setting, the story, and just the stuff the game gives you to do to be pretty dull, pretty boring, and really it just all felt kind of phoned in. Does that sound terrible? My biggest complaint with it really was that a lot of it just felt like incomplete, down to little things like some of the cars not having radios, to glitches and bugs. And ultimately it seemed like a lot of people weren't the biggest fans of it because they've kind of went back on their roadmap and their plans for the game in the future. I do think really this one just needed more time in the oven. It feels like a bad games as a service game. It feels like it's designed to just, be there. It doesn't have enough modes. It's still buggy and glitchy, and a lot of the weapons stuff feels kind of like boring fluff that just isn't needed. It's just totally unnecessary. I liked what they were trying to do with the survival camp system, and it's another one of those games that gets better with friends, but ultimately we're still just chalking this one up as a huge letdown for us Ghost Recon fans. Now maybe Ubisoft can pull this car around and really make something good out of this game. They've done that in the past with quite a few, so we'll see. We'll hope for the best. Because next over at number 5, we have Mario Kart Tour. Yes, this is that mobile Mario Kart game that came out this year, which is another massive disappointment, and frankly, not really what many of us wanted. Especially us here, we do have a tolerance for some bullshit mobile games here and there, but Mario Kart Tour really takes the cake. It was such a letdown, and it just kind of was doomed from the start. We were so burned by it that we've never went back to it because of just the launch. It was kind of offensive. Multiplayer wasn't available at launch, and there was a subscription service, and the higher CC racing mode was behind that $5 a month subscription service. What? I'm sorry, not a lot of games are worth a $5 a month subscription, let alone a really simple AI bot-raced Mario Kart mobile game filled with gacha elements. Basically, it was just all the free-to-play mobile game stuff you really hate was crammed into a Mario Kart game. I don't know why. We were hoping for more. Nintendo has had outings before that had monetization in them, but Mario Kart just goes to great lengths, and after it launched, after we saw what it was, we just haven't went back. Sorry, man. It is what it is, but we're not fans at all. Now, moving on over to number 4, we have Submersed. This is a survival horror game where you're an emergency paramedic whose wife dies and then he goes back to work, but he ends up crash landing on this abandoned structure in the middle of the ocean. And guess what? It's partially submersed. And one of the main enemies is sharks, which is a really awesome concept, but it's just incredibly unsatisfying because they feel dumb and awkward. The biggest problem to be had with the game is that it's just unremarkable and predictable and really straightforward with minimal surprises. And honestly, sometimes that's the biggest sin of all. The most unique element, the shark thing, wasn't as great as it could be. It's just a bad survival horror game, there is some stealth, but it feels kind of half-assed. There is an inventory management system, but it's also really frustrating, and they make some weird decisions. It's also very buggy and just prone to crashes and many issues. And I hate to be a weird broken record, but that stuff is one thing. But the fact that they had such an interesting setup here, an interesting pitch, premise, and they didn't knock it out of the park, cool sharks, you're trapped on a thing. Come on, man. Now, down to number 3, if we're talking about, come on, man, what happened? We have to talk about WWE 2K20. Now, we've previously been pretty light on these games, but 2K20 seems like a mess, where the series has kind of finally been finding its footing with this new simulation style, getting a little bit better and better every year. WWE 2K20, the quality has dropped off this year. Apparently, they switched development studios halfway through, and it definitely shows because the game is an outright mess, and frankly, it's just not fun. I mean, it can be a little bit of fun when you get a chair and you hit someone with it. It's a wrestling game, of course. There's always fun to be had, especially with friends. But a lot of the offerings here are just unsatisfying. The character creator still kind of isn't quite at the great heights the series could have it be. The career mode, the story-based mode, is wild. And I said it in the Before You Buy, and I never go this far, but honestly, the visuals in it and the cutscenes reminded me of an early PS3 game. That is not good. That is not what you want when when you're buying a game that is based on a million dollar sports franchise put out by a billion dollar company. The PC version is prone to tons of freezing and like weird crashes and just tons of graphical glitches abound, whatever console you're playing on, honestly. And every year, it's started to feel more and more like the little updates here and there are just not worth it. But that this year, coupled with just the really awful quality of the whole thing, makes WWE 2K20 a downright bummer. I really think they need to go back to the drawing board with these games big time. Now, down to number 2. Speaking of going back to the drawing board, we have Anthem, a game that you're probably going to see on a lot of top 10 worst games of 2019 lists. Like, come on. It's kind of obvious, like, at this point, like, I feel like we're beating a dead horse. We're kicking a game while it's down. But Anthem was a collection of, like, the worst elements of a games as a service game. It was rushed out the door. BioWare clearly didn't finish it. The story was practically incoherent. Worlds felt empty. Enemy types weren't really that exciting. The raid wasn't in place. The roadmap, after all the backlash, has been completely kind of scrapped and rethought. BioWare has been scrambling to make this a much better game, but the problem is that it came out of the oven just drastically undercooked. Sure, it might look okay, like visually, and the flying is really fun, but ultimately, the game does not put the work in to get you to really enjoy it. The loot isn't that satisfying. The story isn't that satisfying. Say what you will about games like Destiny or Warframe, you might not like them because they're games as a service game, but they have fan bases for reasons, because the people behind the games really put the work in to make a fun, compelling game first that'll keep you playing. Anthem was just a hot mess, not only just because of the game and the state of it, but also because of BioWare. We expect better from BioWare. They've had 2 misses with Mass Effect Andromeda, and definitely more so here with Anthem, but we're really hoping they can turn it around in 2020. But anyway, let's move on to number 1 and talk about Left Alive. This game was a massive letdown for us here because the writing on the wall was pretty exciting. Like, it's a new game set in the Front Mission universe, kind of like a spin-off new adventure. A lot of the original Front Mission people were behind it. It had some heavyweight Japanese talent. It also had Yoji Shinkawa as the character and concept artist who was behind the Metal Gear Solid series. Honestly, the game had a lot of like Metal Gear design influences in the art and just the character and robot designs. The idea was to be kind of like a semi-open world, like abandoned city stealth game where you creep around, but then you can also hijack and hop in giant mechs and tear the place up. It sounds awesome on paper. It was not. It had really unsatisfying stealth with dumb artificial intelligence, like exploitable and unpredictable as hell. The game also had an ugly HUD and all these on-screen indicators and sounds. Mission design-wise, like, you were free to kind of branch off and try other side quests and stuff, but they were just so uninspired and just kind of copy and pasted there with dumb people you have to escort, all while going around and dealing with bland environments. The whole concept of like being trapped in a city and kind of using like stealth guerrilla warfare, like tricking enemies and tossing Molotov cocktails. Even the fact that the game had, a fairly decent graphics engine behind it, some cool effects, and also a really good musical score. It just didn't work out when they actually tried to pull it off. Like, none of it was exciting. Using items was cumbersome. Crafting, any of that guerrilla warfare stuff was just so unsatisfying. It's like the game focused around so much stealth, but then it was barely designed as a stealth game. Like, what happened? This game is number 1 because it's not a good game, number 1, and also because it was a big letdown, and letdowns and disappointments were really like the big theme of this list. And honestly, we think Left Alive is the best example of that, man. But of course, these are our choices for worst games of 2019. There are so many more games out there that we haven't even been able to touch, like little crappy shovelware games. Maybe you've played some of those. Maybe you have a game that really pissed you off. Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear from you guys what your worst games of 2019 were. If you enjoyed this video and maybe had a good time with us, clicking the like button is the best way you can help us out. We'd really appreciate that. And if you're new, consider subscribing and maybe hitting that notification bell, because we put out videos every single day. But hey, as always, thanks for watching. We'll see you guys next time.